Hey there. So, you're trying to figure out what on earth to do with the UK housing market. Buy? Sell? Maybe just hide under the covers for a year? Well, you've come to the right place. We're going to cut through all the noise and get straight to the heart of one of the biggest questions on everyone's mind right now.
All right, let's just jump right in, shall we? With everything going on, the cost of living, policies changing, it feels like everything's up in the air. And that leads to the massive question. Is the UK housing market actually heading for a collapse in 2026? We are going to break it all down.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what a collapse even means. Then we'll look at the latest signals from the market, see what the experts are saying, and explore why a big crash is actually pretty unlikely. We'll also cover the real risks you need to watch, and then we'll give you the final verdict for 2026.
Right, so first things first. This word collapse gets thrown around a lot. Before we go any further, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're actually talking about.
Look, a real market collapse isn't just prices cooling off a bit, no way. We're talking about a 2008 level event. A scenario with really sharp, painful price falls, people defaulting on mortgages left and right, forced sales, the whole thing sending shockwaves through the entire economy. It's a really high bar, and it's totally different from just a simple market correction.
Okay, so keeping that serious definition in mind, let's dig into the data. What are the numbers really telling us at this very moment?
So why all the worry lately? What kicked off this whole conversation? Well, it all goes back to the end of 2025. The market did something unexpected, something that really caught a lot of analysts off guard.
And here it is. This is the number that got the headlines buzzing, a drop of 0.4% in December. Now, I know what you're thinking, 0.4%. That's not a lot. But here's the thing. It was way weaker than anyone expected, and it was actually the slowest growth we'd seen in a year and a half. So when you see a number like that pop up out of nowhere, you can see why it starts to look pretty alarming, right? It's exactly why people started getting nervous. Which of course leads to the million-dollar question on everyone's mind. Is this it? Was that little dip just the first tremor before a massive earthquake? Are we looking at the start of something bigger?
But this is where putting things in perspective is absolutely crucial. Yes, that December dip happened. It's a real number. But when you look at the bigger picture, the forecast for all of 2026, it's not a crash, not even close. In fact, most experts are actually predicting some modest growth, somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 3%. Now that's a completely different story, isn't it?
So, okay, the raw data is a bit of a mixed bag. So what do the folks on the front lines, the experts who live and breathe this stuff, what do they have to say? Let's dive into that.
If there's one thing you take away from what the experts are saying, it's this. There is no single UK housing market. It's not one giant thing moving in the same direction. Forget about it. That idea of uniform growth is totally out the window for 2026. It's much more like a patchwork quilt, Different patches, different regions, all telling their own unique story.
And this really drives that point home. It's literally a tale of two markets happening at the same time. On one side, you've got places like London and the super high-end prime market. The forecast there? Slower growth, maybe even stagnation. But then, you look at the other side, Scotland, Northern England. They're showing some serious strength. In fact, they're tipped to see some of the biggest price jumps in the whole country.
And it gets even more layered. You talk to surveyors, and they're feeling, cautiously optimistic about sales and prices for 2026. But then you talk to the house builders, and they're putting out warnings about muted demand, especially from first-time buyers. So, yeah, it's a complicated picture for sure. But the key thing, nobody is screaming collapse.
All right, so we've seen the data. We've heard from the experts. Let's get right to the heart of it. Why is it that most economists are saying a full-blown catastrophic crash just isn't in the cards for 2026?
Well, it really boils down to four key pillars holding things up. First, as we saw, the baseline forecast is still for growth. Modest growth, but growth nonetheless. Second, and this is a big one, interest rates are starting to ease up, making mortgages a bit more affordable. Third, first-time buyers, despite the challenges, are still expected to be a major force in the market. And fourth, that patchwork quilt thing we talked about, that regional variation actually acts like a shock absorber, making a single nationwide crash really, really unlikely.
Now, this doesn't mean it's all sunshine and roses, of course not. To get a real, balanced view, we have to be realistic and look at the headwinds, the very real challenges that could definitely put the brakes on things. There are really three main risks we need to keep an eye on. You can think of them as potential storm clouds.
First, any uncertainty around taxes or new government policies could really cool down demand. Second, affordability is still a huge hurdle. There's no getting around that, particularly for younger buyers trying to get on the ladder. And finally, that regional split we've been talking about, there's a risk it could get even more extreme, which could create some real pockets of pain in those higher-priced markets.
Okay, let's bring it all home. We've looked at the data, we've listened to the experts, we've weighed the stabilizing factors against the risks. So, what's the final verdict for 2026?
Here it is, the bottom line. The UK housing market is not collapsing in 2026. What it is doing is adjusting. It's evolving. The market is changing, but it is not breaking. So think of it more like a course correction, not a crash.
So, to put the whole 2026 outlook in a nutshell for you, we're looking at modest price growth, not scary declines. Mortgage affordability should get a bit better as rates continue to ease, and those strong regional differences, they're here to stay. It's a simple fact. Some parts of the country are just going to do a lot better than others.
And this final thought really sums up the expert consensus perfectly. We need to forget about this idea of a dramatic overnight crash. Instead, the smart way to think about 2026 is as a year of slow, steady adjustment and really important regional shifts.
And that brings us to one final forward-looking thought. Because a market that's evolving instead of collapsing isn't just about navigating risks. It's also about change. And change always creates new openings. So the big question to leave you with is this. As these old market patterns continue to shift, where will the new opportunities start to pop up?